Hello, welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the Monday show with me, Andrew Musgrove, and him, Mark Crothers. We're going to reflect on the FA Cup exit to Manchester City and try to answer the question of whether Newcastle United's domestic campaign is over. As always, a huge thanks to our sponsors, Saily and NordVPN, two products which can enhance your trip abroad. NordVPN allows you to safely browse on public Wi-Fi, while Saily is the eSIM, providing you the very best network coverage at an affordable price. Pick up a discount on both products by clicking the link in the podcast description box. Mark, welcome back to the show. How are you keeping? You well? You good? Had a good weekend?
I've had a good weekend, very good weekend, yeah. The under 11s or under 12s team that I helped coach won on Saturday morning, which was good, and then had a very enjoyable and surprisingly sunny afternoon at South Shields, watching the Mariners win their game to stay at the top of the National League North table and straight into St James's Park, where everything went a bit squiffy, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it wasn't great, but your non-league football life is going very well at the moment, isn't it? With South Shields and Gateshead as well.
Gateshead flying, yeah. Gateshead, a real turnaround in fortunes. Look as if they can pull off what many call mission impossible and staying up and avoiding relegation. South Shields could well join them in the National League next season. A word for Blythe Spartans as well, who were all but condemned to relegation about a month ago, but now are 4 or 5 points clear of the drop zone after a good turnaround in form. So yeah, that's going well. But as I say, Saturday night, not so much.
No, but I'm all for great escapes.
Me too.
I'm very happy because at home, our little lad, it'll be 5 weeks on Friday, and we pretty much had an undisturbed night of sleep other than the feeds, which anyone who's a father or a mother will know that is something to be celebrated.
That's a big step forward.
So forget the heartache of Newcastle going out in the FA Cup. I've just had the best kind of Sunday night ever because I finally started to get a little bit of sleep.
I thought you seemed a bit more with it today. Last week was
I'm alive.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about Newcastle United versus Manchester City, just to bring me back down to earth with a lovely bang. Newcastle lost 3-1 in the FA Cup at St James's Park. And we're going to try and look at the bigger picture, as I said there in the introduction, about Newcastle's domestic campaign and whether it is over or is there something still to play for. But I do want to start, Mark, by just looking at the team news and ask you whether you think Eddie Howe got the starting 11 right. 4 changes were made. Botman, Willick, Asula and Valdemara came in for Byrne, Ramsey, Gordon and Joe Linson. Now, there were injury concerns over both Gordon and Joe Linson, but my argument would be that you've got more chance of beating Manchester City than you have Barcelona, and you've got more chance of winning the FA Cup than you have the Champions League. Both were on the bench. For me, I would have tried to play them because I think that was the best chance Newcastle had of A, getting any silverware, and B, getting into Europe.
As much as I'd like to, I find it hard to disagree with any of that. I think one thing I would say in terms of Valdemara, and I think Eddie Howe may well have pointed to this in his post-match press conference, was that sort of game isn't for him. When you're playing an opposition who can move the ball quickly, who retain possession so well, who need to be pressed, it's not really Nick Valdemara's game, which then and I realise this is with the benefit of hindsight, makes me wonder why play him. If it was just out of necessity, could you have maybe switched things around a bit? Could Visser have started as a striker and maybe play Asula a bit deeper to give you more energy, or could he play it out wide? Just not for the first time this season. I just felt there was a lack of clarity, a lack of I'm trying to think how to put this. There was just a bit of muddled thinking on the touchline throughout the game. The team selection, I kind of understood it to a degree, and again, it is with the benefit of hindsight. I agree though that it was lacking a Joe Linton in there. It was lacking the forward thrust of an Anthony Gordon. Apart from that, though, the back four, fair enough, because there weren't too many options. My issue came later in the game when substitutes were made and it was constant chopping and changing, and that just stopped any chance of getting momentum.
And again, we answer these questions and ask these questions with the benefit of hindsight. But given that Joe Linton played from 62 minutes and Anthony Gordon came off the bench 72 minutes, if they're fit enough to come off the bench for 20 minutes, half an hour, then they're fit enough to start, surely.
Yeah, possibly being overly cautious. They mentioned Gordon had an ankle knock, didn't they? Which is why he didn't start. And obviously they're still trying to sort of keep an eye on Joelinton's work back towards full fitness. So I think maybe it is just being overly cautious. Again, I think you are right. If they're fit enough to come on for half an hour plus, then maybe they could have at least got, 45 to an hour out of them. But obviously the medical staff and Eddie Howe and Jason Tidwell felt that wasn't so.
Harvey Barnes grabbed the opener with 18 minutes gone, and Newcastle deserved the lead. They were on the front foot. They had intent. Nick Voldemort had one headed off the line. But as we've seen so many times this season, after going ahead, they shrunk. It's a great finish by Harvey Barnes. Really, really nice goal. But how frustrating is it, Mark, that once again, Newcastle United, having started so well, just dropped off?
When you play a team like Manchester City, as good as Manchester City, you have to be brave. You have to be brave for 90 minutes. You have to be on the front foot, in their faces. You have to be energetic. You have to be intense. And most of all, probably more than anything else, you have to concentrate. Now, Newcastle, for the first 25 minutes, maybe half an hour, hit all of those factors. They were excellent for the first half an hour. The goal was so well worked. It's an unbelievable ball from Sandro Tonali, by the way, and a brilliant finish from Barnes. And when he got in that position, I never thought he was going to do anything but score. But Newcastle, as the game made its way towards half time, all of the levels dropped and the concentration went. The intensity stopped. They were happy to sit in and try and almost manage Manchester City. Eventually, players like City are going to find a way through. And that's what happened. You had Doku's, Savinho, who I thought was excellent, by the way, Marmouche. Players like this, people go on about them being City's second choice and reserve side and all this sort of nonsense. These are highly motivated players trying to prove a point to Pep Guardiola that they deserve to be in the starting lineup for games like Real Madrid, for games that are coming up in the Premier League. So you have to maintain those levels. Newcastle didn't. And I'm sorry, and it's a constant source of frustration this season is the fact that not tracking runners, making it too easy for teams to score goals. All 3 goals are avoidable. It's simple balls across the 6-yard box. It's people not tracking back, whether that's wingers or midfielders. It's basics. It's absolute basics. Yes, it's a complex game against a team like City. It's a tactical battle. But it wasn't City's tactics that won that game. It was Newcastle switching off and making life too easy for them.
Don't worry, ladies and gents. You're going to get a rant in a moment about City's equaliser. But just on what you said there about the opening half an hour, because before we started recording, you said to me, for the first 25 minutes, half an hour, Newcastle United did everything you need to do to beat the Manchester City side. So how come that after they've grabbed the goal, does it change so quickly? And they go from having that confidence and that intent to then sitting deep and being unable to get out of their own half? Is it? Well, I actually don't even know what the answer is, because it's like such a quick switch. I was going to ask there, is it down to confidence and self-belief? But we've just said for the opening 20 minutes, that's exactly what they had. Obviously, Man City, as we said, even the second string, great side. But is it as simple as that Manchester City side that played on Saturday is better than Newcastle United?
They just weren't good enough to do it on the day. They just weren't good enough to carry it on. They weren't good enough.
But they were for 20 minutes, half an hour.
They were, but it's one thing to do it in a admittedly 25 minutes, half an hour. That's a third of the game, isn't it, really, if you're talking about the latter. They just weren't good enough to carry it on for 90, which you have to do. And I look at when Newcastle beat Manchester City early in the season in the league at St James's, they were good enough that day. They started well and they carried it on throughout the game, but they just couldn't hit those levels on Saturday for a 90-minute display. When you want to beat the best teams, and this will come against Barcelona, if Newcastle want to get a positive result on Tuesday night, they're going to have to put in a 90-minute performance. When you play against the teams that are struggling in the league, your Burnleys of this world, you can maybe come in and out of games to an extent, but when you're going to play the top teams in the league, the top teams in the world, you can't allow those standards to slip for a minute, because the opposition have players that are that good that the minute your levels drop, whether that's performance levels whether that's intensity levels, whether it's concentration levels, you get punished. And that's what happened on Saturday. Newcastle got punished by top players.
Doesn't help, though, that, as you've mentioned, they're not doing the basics right. Man City level just before half-time through Savinho, and I am so angry at this goal. It feels like every single week I come onto this show and I repeat myself, but I'm going to have to say it again. Please start defending properly. Once again, an opposition player has been allowed to walk unmarked into the box to put the ball home. Man City, as you've mentioned, they're effectively playing their reserve side, still a side that would finish in the top 6. They need no invitation to score goals. They need zero help in grabbing goals. Why hasn't Savinho been tracked? And if he's been allowed to slip away, why isn't the man on the edge of the box, which is Harvey Barnes, busting a gut to get back to him? It is the basics not being done time and time again. It's not good enough. It's unacceptable. And it's happening far too often. If you can't do the basics, then you become your own worst enemy. And that's exactly what Newcastle United have been, not only on Saturday, but throughout really the entirety of this season, where it's been goals like that, where they've not done the schoolboy defending good enough, allowing the opposition in, and then the game's got away from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at kind of both wings as well, and I just think the crosses come in a little bit too easily for my liking. It kind of looks as if that situation's being managed down Manchester City's left and Newcastle's right, but then the crosses come in. I think it was you shared a graphic on social media of the kind of a screenshot of Savinho, well, the ball hitting Savinho and going in, and you've got Harvey Barnes sitting 20 yards from goal, certainly edge of the box. Hall has been kind of dragged in the middle, which is fair enough because he's trying to cover, in there. But then Barnes has got to do his job as well, and that means tracking back. And look, it's not the only time it's happened this season, which is a frustration. But this goes back to what I was just saying about concentration levels. And clearly Barnes has switched off. If you switch off, you get punished. Simple as that.
In one hand, it is difficult, isn't it? Because you've got really, really talented players like a Savinho, like a Semenyo, and then you've got Harvey Barnes, whose natural instinct is just to go forward. That's what he's good at. Maybe he hasn't got that defensive element about him. Neither has Anthony Gordon. But at the same time, you have to. Like, surely the instruction during the week is, like, we'll not worry about telling you what to do going forward because you know what to do. You know you're good at that. But make sure when they've got the ball that you don't leave any space behind you. And at the very, very least, you were on his shoulder. And that graphic you mentioned, you can head over to my Facebook journalist page to see it. Like, I am so angry. Like, I looked at it again this morning, just looking at some of the comments that were left, and thank you for everyone who's engaged with it. Like, there are no words to describe how angry I am. And even though we do talk about this every single week near enough, every time it happens, I get even more angry because that goal, it just hits Savinho and rolls in the back of the net. If Harvey Barnes is doing his job properly and he's next to him, he gets there, he clears it, and Newcastle still have a 1-0 lead.
I kind of get the feeling that you could probably just clip exactly what you just said there. Maybe the little replacing of a few players' names.
But how many times we said this last week, and we said it the week before. Like, and I'm starting to hate myself because I'm repeating myself, and no doubt our viewers and listeners.
But I'm going to say the same thing about the second goal.
Yeah,
it's exactly the same. There's no pressure on the ball. There is no time. I think Botman got a half touch on it on a clearance in the early stage of the second half, and then City have regained possession, or retained it really, and reworked the ball and done exactly the same sort of movement, got the cross in, and it's been tapped home eventually. It's just not good enough. But again, this is the difference between good Premier League players and great Premier League players. It is those concentration levels. It is that ability to spot when an opposition has switched off. And that's a difference of where Newcastle are at and where City are at.
Now, if I was Eddie Howe, coming to training today, obviously the focus is on Barcelona on Tuesday. And he kind of said we kind of move on from what happened against City. But I'd be making a massive point to not just Harvey Barnes, but to all the wingers who potentially could start on Tuesday, but in general, the whole side. And I'd have that clip playing. That is not allowed to happen, because forget what Man City can do. Imagine what Barcelona will do if you give them that much space. And the tie could be over tomorrow night if Newcastle United defend like that. It will be over if Newcastle defend like that.
There's going to be a lot of threat coming from out wide, you'd imagine, because it'll be Yamal and Rashford probably, who love getting in those situations. It's going to be a tough night for the two full-backs tomorrow night, and they're going to need every bit of support from whoever the wingers are. I suspect it'll be certainly Murphy. I would think will start on the right because he is a little bit more capable of tracking back. On the left, because I think Gordon will start up front. You're probably going to look at Bonds, and hopefully he'll have learned a lesson, because otherwise Yamal will run amok. But anyway, back to Saturday. Yeah, again, I really do apologise for repeating myself, but I think you're just seeing the difference. I know we can talk about the money spent and all this sort of stuff, but when you're in that in-game scenario, the difference between the two sets of players is the concentration levels. It is the ability to spot little switch-offs.
But is it really? Because the professional footballers getting paid a lot of money. They're Premier League athletes, and Barnes is a good player. I'm a big fan of Harvey Barnes, but I mentioned Tonali the other week, big fan of him, but he's very, very guilty of doing this where he lets the man go unmarked into the box. Like, is it really the difference between an elite player and a good player? I don't think it is, because we've described it as the basics. Surely, if you are a Premier League athlete, whether you're playing for Newcastle United, Man City, or sitting at the bottom of the Premier League with Wolves, the basics are the basics.
They are, but the thing is, the very top players do the basics very well, minute in, minute out, second in, second out, every game. Even when they're not playing well, you fall back upon your basics. You know, there was spells in the second half when Newcastle looked flustered and 6 and 7 yard passes were going astray. City never did that, really. Every time they got the ball, even the players that didn't play well on Saturday, they did what they had to. They got the basics in. Not every player in the world, no matter who they are, whether it's Lamine Yamal or whether it's a non-league player, plays well for 90 minutes of every game. What the best do is they fall back on those basics, and they do that consistently. Newcastle didn't do that.
And I feel like we ask this question nearly every single week. Whose fault is it? Is it Eddie Howe? Is it the players? Is there a lack of leadership on the pitch? Because we can't be coming into this studio every single week near enough after every single game and go, they've done it again.
It's accountability. It's players on the pitch. Like how naturally people will look to the coach and staff, the manager and the assistant manager and the backroom staff. But on the pitch, the players have to take accountability, and you would hope that certain players after Saturday are holding their hands up and going, yes, that was me. I switched off. I allowed my runner to go. I didn't track him. It's down to me. But I would also hope that other players are holding them accountable. There was a situation in I think it was the first half, when Newcastle, just before the equaliser, looked really panicked defensively. And there was a lot of talking going on. And on 3 occasions in the space of about 6 minutes, Kieran Trippier's gone over and kind of given a bit of a stern warning to a few players, which I thought was brilliant. And we need more of that. We need more players. Just because he's captain and the most experienced player on the team, it shouldn't just fall on him. But he kind of got in between. I can't remember who it was now. Botman was one of them. And there was another couple of players. And it was at the Gallagher end, and he gave them a bit of a warning and said, come on, you could see what he was doing. Get in position, get concentrated. They need more of that. They need more players who are vocal like that. And as I say, it's got to be accountability on the pitch. That is not me saying the coaching staff and management team shouldn't take some of the blame at all. I thought, as I said earlier, the decision-making with substitutes, when they were made, how they were made, just stopped any rhythm in the closing stages as Newcastle tried to get back in the game, because there was too much swapping and changing. You look at Hall going to right back and then being hooked and going to taken off, and then you get Livramento coming on, Byrne going to left back, and there's just changes everywhere. Nothing felt fluid. It just felt almost stunted to a degree.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments your thoughts on what we've discussed so far. I want to talk about the reaction to the defeat, because it's been very interesting, and a lot of people have remarked along the lines of Newcastle kind of need to accept their place in the pecking order. This is Manchester City. they're a great side, even their reserve side. Kieran Trippier himself said City are a top side, and we have to take it on the chin today. Is that acceptable, Mark? Is that a fair assessment?
I don't think that's necessarily Trippier saying anything negative. We know what City are, but I can't help but shake the feeling that Saturday was a massive missed opportunity. Now, I'm not going to contradict what I said earlier and say that, about the City being a weakened side, because I don't think they have a weakened side as such. What they have is a group of players that want to play week in, week out. So you look at your Savinhos, he's given Pep Guardiola something to think about by that performance. There were several other performances across the pitch where you think you haven't played regularly in that team, but now you've given Pep Guardiola something to think about. So I don't kind of buy into that argument that it was easier. But what I do think is, having got yourself in front after a good opening half hour and having got City to a degree on the back foot and looking a bit panicked defensively, Newcastle pressed high. They were doing that well. They were putting City under pressure. They were doing everything well. But they had to keep on the front foot. You have to keep them blocked in, as they did in the league game. And that's the difference between the two sides. I don't think there shouldn't be, maybe there is to a degree actually, a little bit of an inferiority complex from Newcastle when they come up against teams like this. And I know we keep going back to this argument about when do they become an elite club. It's when that goes.
Do you think there's sort of a resignation of what happens and what's to come when they do concede, say, that equaliser, 37 minutes gone on the clock, like against Barcelona? If they go 1-0 down, do we see something similar where they may have had a great start to the game, but suddenly they shrink, and there's just kind of this acceptance, or it's a Barcelona, it's a Man City, we're nowhere near that level. If we get beat, we get beat sort of mentality. Well, I'm not saying that because that's hard, because obviously the players go in wanting to win every game, and obviously the comments from Trippier has come after. But
it's a mentality thing, isn't it? That's a mentality thing. I think when I look at, and I know we always compare sort of City's rise with Newcastle's, what Newcastle are trying to do to get to those levels. City were able to go and bring in sort of 5 or 6 top players straight away, whereas Newcastle have had to do it sort of drip fed in because of, I'm sorry to go back to it, and I hate mentioning it, but your PSRs and FFPs and all that nonsense, whereas City just went, there's a big splurge on a load of players who came in and transformed the team, and they were lucky that I had someone like who's there already as well from pre-takeover. Newcastle need players that are more used to being in this situation on a regular basis, and I feel at the moment that needs to be the target for the summer, where they go and get players, if possible, that have been in title fights, that have been in regular competition for places deep in competitions in the FA Cup and whatever. At the moment, you look around the squad, and you've got maybe Trippier, who's done it, Bruno to a degree in Lyon when he was there, Tonali, obviously AC Milan, but I don't feel as if we've got enough in that squad that have really challenged for major honours on a regular basis. That may help the mentality improve when they are faced with adversity, because I agree, particularly when the start of the second half really annoyed me, because it was so passive. They sat back straight away. You literally watch from kick-off. City kicked off and Newcastle just dropped back. And at one stage, all Newcastle players, all 11 of them, were in their own half. And City just worked the ball, stayed patient, and then the opening hit. And they punished Newcastle. It was too passive. Newcastle had a big opportunity to set the tone for the 45 minutes by getting in their faces. But I feel as if they tried to be maybe a little bit too clever and a little bit too cautious and manage the opening stage of the second half, and someone switched off and it was bang. Then the game's, even though it was only 2-1, the game is done.
Yeah. And yes, as I've mentioned, a lot of fans, especially on social media, have come out and said, it's Man City. Like, what are you expecting? I don't think it's a good look. And I'm never going to tell anyone what to think or what to post. This is just my opinion. But I don't think it's a good look. I think it's a defeatist attitude. I think it's a sign of weakness, of fear, of paying teams too much respect. And Newcastle United are not the level of Manchester City, but would we say they're better than Nottingham Forest or Leeds United? In one side who drew with City and the other who pushed them close. Are Newcastle better than them on paper? Yes, definitely. So why is there such an acceptance of this defeat and defeats against top sides? It absolutely infuriates me. Look, I predicted a defeat against City on Saturday, but it doesn't mean I accept it. It doesn't mean I accept this kind of they're a bigger side. Yeah, okay. No, I did predict it, but it's not something I wanted to see. I want to see belief and I want to see confidence. And right now, I don't think Newcastle United have that, either on the pitch or in the terraces. And if anyone's watching this or listening to this and getting ready to apply the same train of thought to the Barcelona game, then I would plead with you to have a rethink, because the last thing Newcastle United need on Tuesday night is half the ground already thinking the tie's done and dusted in Barca's favour, because that just will not help.
There needs to be the PSG attitude of that night against PSG. Now, that's not me saying Newcastle are going to go and steamroll at Barcelona 4-1. But that night against PSG, the stadium was rocking and there was a belief. And the tone was set early on when Newcastle didn't sit back. I know, was it Dembele had a good chance when he skewed it across goal. But the stadium, the energy, I said this last week, didn't I? The energy inside St. James's, it transmitted onto the pitch. And the players, you saw when challenges were going in and everyone was up for it. Saturday didn't feel that way anywhere on or off the pitch. It felt as if it was almost a let's see what happens. And really, after the first 25 minutes, half an hour, that should have grown, but it didn't for some reason. And I feel as if it's just the way the season's been, because we've never had a consistent run of good performances. They have been kind of bitty to a degree. But Tuesday night has to be absolute unwavering belief, commitment, energy, intensity on and off the pitch. Barca are an unbelievable side. They're one of my favourite sides to watch in world football. I absolutely love watching them. The Yamals, Rashford this season's been incredible. Lewandowski will be thereabouts at the top end of the pitch. He'll always be a threat, despite the fact how old he is. We know what they've got in midfield with Pedri and players like that. They are quality. But I do think you can get at them defensively. And if Newcastle can set the tone early on and really go after them and try and put them on the back foot, which would be easier said than done, they can do something, but they have to believe it. They have to go in that game believing. It's a mentality thing. I'm sorry we keep coming back to it, and we have many times this season. It's a mentality thing.
And it goes back to what we were saying before. It kind of feels like, especially against the bigger sides of Newcastle United, do get an early goal, then all of a sudden we are reminded of what has happened previously, not even against good sides, to be honest, Brentford, West Ham, sort of thing, where you go, oh my goodness me, can Newcastle hold on to this lead? And, it's bad enough thinking that against, average sides, to want a better phrase. But if you're thinking that against the best sides, then you inevitably are going to throw away the lead. And again, it's fine margins in terms of, you put it perfectly there. It kind of felt a night of let's see what happens, rather than we can do this. And that is the difference for me between an elite side and a good or average side. It is the collective belief that we belong here. Yes, it's Manchester City with all their billions and all their fantastic players. And yes, we take that second string and most of them could get into this Newcastle United side. But Newcastle United, they've proven they belong at the top table, but they're only going to stay there if they believe that themselves, both again, player-wise and in the terraces. You mentioned Valdemar at the beginning of the show, and I've got the quote here from Eddie Howe that you mentioned. It was difficult for any of our midfielders today because Man City keep the ball so well. They do what they do brilliant, and I think that's a difficult game for Nick when we're not in possession of the ball. His best qualities are going to be shown when we have the ball. So let's go into a bit more depth about the question you asked at the beginning of the show. Why are you playing Nick Valdemar in a position which he's not at home in, and against a team who you've openly admitted their style just doesn't work for Nick Valdemar? Now, Eddie Howe also added we had 3 fit and available players to play in there today. So that's kind of maybe the answer to the question I've just asked. But for you, Mark, even with that in mind, do you just try and put anyone else in there but Nick Voldemort, or do you try and change the formation? Because again, the poor lad's gone home, probably beating himself up, feeling down in the dumps, and it's not really of his own making because he's been deployed in a position where everyone, including Eddie Howe, I think, knows it's just not working for him.
Yeah, again, it's one of them where you look at, going back to what we said earlier about, do you just start Joelinton and then, try and get ahead in the game through his press and try and get a foothold in the game through his press, and then, maybe Voldemort comes on later on. I thought as soon as I saw the team being announced that it wouldn't be a game for Nick Voldemort. I actually thought he might have played up front, and there could be a little adjustment in behind him where maybe, as I said earlier, Asula played out wide, or possibly in the 10, just to give you that energy in there, because Nick Voldemort is a very good player, and I still believe he can become a good player for Newcastle when they figure out how to use him, because they haven't yet. He's very unique. He's not something we've seen before in the Premier League, really, in that we want him because he's a 6'6", forward, whatever you want to class him as. We want him to be a target man. Well, we don't, but, as a kind of royal we believe he should be a target man, and he should be this kind of powerful player that can hold the ball up and do all this stuff that we're used to target men being, but he's not that. And it just feels if Newcastle, one, haven't figured out what he is, and two, haven't figured out how to get the best out of him. But I would, as I say, before the game on Saturday, I just thought this isn't going to be the game for him. I thought City would be able to. One of City's strengths is whoever's playing in front of the back four, they can basically maneuver the ball easily wherever they want on the pitch from that pivot. And that's what they did on Saturday. And they did it really well in midfield. They played around Voldemort, which opened up gaps. I am not solely putting the blame on him for that defeat, by the way. I just think it just didn't. Maybe it was necessity. I mean, Tonali and Willock played a little bit deeper, didn't they? I actually thought Joe Willock did all right again in spells. But I just wonder if maybe Joelinton should have been risked and then you bring Voldemort on later.
Does this experiment
has to end?
Yeah.
It's not working. It's not working. The only time I would fall back on it is maybe in a game when Newcastle are going to dominate possession. If they are going to play against a team at home in particular, where they are expected to be on the ball, when they are expected to find little pockets of space and kind of dominate possession, then I think you probably could get away with it. But 100% stop this experiment when it's in games when Newcastle are going to be second best and aren't going to be on the ball for the majority of the game.
Let us know in the comments your thoughts on that one. Now to the final question, and the key question. Is Newcastle United's domestic campaign over? Eddie Howe, speaking after the game to Manchester City, said Tuesday is now really our season. It's in the hands of the next two games in the Champions League. And that is the quote which has got a lot of people talking, sparked a lot of debate, and why we're asking the question. Because reading that, Eddie Howe has seemingly written off the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, that was my first thought. He also called Barcelona the biggest game in the club's history, which I thought was an interesting comment. I do think that was maybe just a kind of reactive thing. And I think in the cold light of day, he wouldn't think that. It's interesting to see that his comments there almost write off the fact that they are just about, and I mean just about, in the European race still. I still believe they can get 7th, which is possibly absolute blind faith. But I look at it and think they ain't going to win the Champions League. I'm sorry, I'll say that now. And I hope you're clipping this up in May and we're sat here going, what a night that was. But they ain't going to win the Champions League. It's going to be a massive, massive test against Barcelona. So once that's consigned to the history books, no matter which way it goes, Newcastle have to focus on, can we close the gap on the likes of Brentford? Was it 5 points?
Brentford are 7th, 44 points, and Newcastle are 12th on 39.
So it's 5 points. That should be...
it's manageable. It's achievable.
It should be Conference League, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I think maybe 8th place might get a spot as well, potentially.
Depending on what happens in Europe with English clubs, I guess.
And look, it's 5 points. And if you want to look up above, as we said, Newcastle are on 39 points. And let's say for argument's sake, 5th gets the Champions League, where Chelsea currently are on 48. So 9 points difference. That's probably out of reach. But I certainly think Conference League or Europa League is there to be had. And I just find it really interesting that Eddie Howe was as honest and open with that quote after the game. Now, look, you carry that by saying it's just right after he's been knocked out of the FA Cup, so emotions are running high. Maybe once he's asked about it ahead of the Barcelona game, he might say something different and maybe go into a bit more detail and explain that it didn't mean it in the way it came across. But just in the context of those quotes, it does sound like he has got everything pinned on what people would say a miracle against Barcelona. And if it doesn't work, then there's nothing left to play for the rest of the season. And I don't think that's necessarily the case because although there is a big points gap there to 7th and 8th, it's only 5 or 6 points.
I think the domestic season is hanging by a thread now. Newcastle's margin for error in the Premier League it's very thin. But it is possible.
And there'll not be as many games.
No, there won't.
Could that be the saving grace?
Well, and the big plus we haven't spoke about from Saturday is Tina Livramento being back, which is a massive plus. But at the same time, there's just no margin for error. You look at the teams above, they're going to drop points, but so will Newcastle. They have to find some consistency. They have to find the energy levels that they've shown very rarely this season. I still think they can get into Europe, and again, it may well be blind faith because there are a lot of good teams around them in the table. There are a lot of good teams above them in the table. But you can't tell me Newcastle aren't capable of getting enough points together to get into that top 7 or 8. I think 8 won't get into Europe, I've got to be honest. It will depend on who wins the sort of domestic competitions and who wins European competitions for it to stretch that far. But there's just so little room for error. And that's what worries me this season because Newcastle, they may well pick up some great results in the next few weeks, but you just wouldn't rule out the fact they'll throw in a couple of shockers as well.
Yeah. And if you look at the Premier League fixtures to come, Chelsea, they're very up and down. He's done a good job, but I don't think that's necessarily a Stonewall win for Chelsea. Sunderland, it's a derby, can go either way, but Crystal Palace, they're just below Newcastle on the table. Bournemouth, very inconsistent. Arsenal getting to the business end of the season. Could they throw a little bit of a wobble? Then into May, Brighton, another really inconsistent side. Nottingham Forest scrapping for their lives. West Ham, another one fighting for survival. And then Fulham to wrap up the season. There are very winnable games in this final run-in. However, you mentioned it there, the way Newcastle's season is gone, you wouldn't want to be putting any pennies on any result in Newcastle's favour because, they're probably more likely to be Arsenal than they are Crystal Palace.
So you started that by, and I 100% understand why, by looking at the opposition and reasons why they might not win the game, which I think speaks volumes, rather than going, Newcastle could go play Palace and dominate possession and go and get a win. They could, who else was it? Forest, Newcastle really, or Bournemouth, should be looking at using this play to win that game because that's where they're weak. But instead, we're looking at reasons why that opposition won't win the game, which I think speaks volumes. I know it's been done totally unintentionally, by the way, but it speaks volumes of where we're at with Newcastle. By where we're at, I mean everyone really, where the confidence and belief that they can do something between now and the end of the season is very much, again, hanging by a thread.
Yeah, it's a strange place to be in because, a couple of years ago, you go Bournemouth or Forest or West Ham, go, yeah, I'm willing to bet Newcastle United will win those games. But sitting here, and I'm not willing to bet anything because it's been just one of those seasons. But go on then, Mark, because I feel like we didn't get a proper answer. Is Newcastle United's domestic campaign over?
No, it's not. It again, I will say it's hanging by a thread, but it's not over. Not until and it shouldn't be over until it's mathematically impossible to get into that top 7. This group of players should want to, I'm not going to say make amends, but they should want to improve between now and the end of the season. It hasn't. Look, on the whole, it looks a good season because they've got to the semi-finals of Carabao Cup. They're into the last 16 of the Champions League. They've been good in spells, but it hasn't been a great season of brilliant performances. We can pinpoint the odd one. We can look at Man City at home in the league, for example. But it hasn't been a great season in that sense. And the fact that they are sat in the bottom half of the table, and we're talking about what a season that started, can they get in the Champions League again? We're now looking at, and this is no disrespect to the Conference League, by the way, but we're now looking at, they're on the fringes of the battle again, the Conference League. I think that speaks volumes. Now, Newcastle United, I think, need European football next season. But at the same time, and the club as a whole, not just Eddie Howe, not just the players, need to learn lessons from what's happened in the last two Champions League campaigns where they've left themselves, sometimes not through any fault of their own, but sometimes it has been, they've left themselves vulnerable in certain areas in the squad. So if they do get into Europe, there has to be a strong effort to make sure the squad is robust enough to cope with that. If they don't, I think they may lose a big player, maybe two, but maybe that will give them the finances to go and, again, make the squad stronger as a whole. So, again, to finish, no, it's not. It absolutely isn't over yet in terms of domestic, but there is very little room for error.
Yeah. I think by the time the international break comes around in a couple of weeks, then we might be able to give a more definite answer. Because, you know, if you lose to Chelsea and you lose to Sunderland, which is a whole other thing, before we even get into kind of the fallout of that, if that was to happen, but just looking at the points,
yeah,
then you would probably say it's then a battle to finish inside the top 10, which is not what we were expecting at the start of the season. Do let us know in the comments your thoughts. Is Newcastle United's domestic campaign over? What did you make of Eddie Howe's comments? Is it one of those, like I say, where emotions are running high and they can be misinterpreted? It'd be interesting to get his thoughts now that dust has settled on that FA Cup exit. Fingers crossed Newcastle United can pick up a win against Barcelona. John Gibson will be providing the match preview, so do tune in for that one. Me and Mark will be back later in the week, hopefully celebrating a win for Newcastle over Barcelona. Until then, keep yourself safe and head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news.